The spoiled son of the millionaire humiliated the cook, without knowing the secret he held. Brandon Sullivan exploded in rage when he saw the simple dish that had been served during the business dinner. His voice echoed through the mansion in New York City as he hurled insults at the man who had worked in the kitchen for so many years. Then he stormed into the kitchen like a hurricane, finding Michael Reynolds organizing utensils with his calloused hands. The 23-year-old didn't hesitate to throw the plate onto the marble floor, the noise reverberating through the room. "You embarrassed me in front of my partners," Brandon shouted, pointing his finger at the 52-year-old man who kept his head down. "What kind of garbage is this you prepared?" Michael remained silent, his hands trembling slightly as he bent down to pick up the shattered porcelain pieces. The other household staff watched from the doorway, too afraid to intervene. "No." Brandon gripped the cook's arm tightly. "You're going to kneel and clean up this mess you made, in front of everyone." The older man raised his eyes for the first time, and Brandon saw a deep sadness in his gaze. But there was something else there, something the young man couldn't quite place. "Please, Brandon," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. "Mr. Brandon to you," the young man corrected, shoving him down. "And if you don't do what I say, you can find another job today." Michael Reynolds slowly knelt, each movement seeming to carry the weight of years of buried pain. His hands began gathering the shards as a single tear rolled down his bearded face. But before he could finish cleaning, the cook lifted his head slightly and murmured something that made Brandon hesitate for a second. "Your mother wouldn't have wanted to see this." The words hit the young man like a punch to the gut. How dare this servant mention Elizabeth Sullivan, his mother who had passed 5 years ago? And even stranger, why did those words sound so familiar? Brandon stormed out of the kitchen, leaving Michael to finish in silence. The other staff quickly scattered, but Mrs. Margaret, the 60-year-old housekeeper, lingered for a few minutes watching the cook. "Michael, you shouldn't have mentioned the mistress," she said softly, helping him up. "I know, Margaret, but he's becoming just like his father was before everything changed." The housekeeper shook her head, worried. She knew secrets about that house that could change everything, but she had sworn to keep silent many years ago. That same night, Brandon paced restlessly through the mansion's halls. Anger still burned in his veins, but the cook's words echoed in his mind. How dare Michael speak about his mother? And why did that voice feel so strangely familiar? Passing through the kitchen to get a glass of water, he noticed something on the floor near the trash. It was an old photograph, yellowed with age, that must have fallen from somewhere. Brandon picked it up and froze. In the picture, his father, Richard Sullivan, stood embracing a younger man, both smiling broadly. The strange thing was, that man bore a striking resemblance to Michael Reynolds, just decades younger. They wore clothes from the 90s, and behind them was what looked like the old headquarters of the family business. Brandon pocketed the photo, deciding not to tell anyone about his discovery. But from that moment on, he began watching Michael with new eyes, noticing details he'd overlooked before. The next day at lunch, Brandon decided to provoke the cook again. He called him into the dining room and began criticizing every dish served, waiting for some reaction. "This food is tasteless," lied Brandon, pushing the plate away. "My mother used to make much better gnocchi than this." Michael stopped clearing the dishes, his hands trembling slightly. "Mrs. Elizabeth's gnocchi was truly special," he said softly, almost to himself. "She would add a bit of nutmeg to the dough and always finish it with freshly grated Parmesan cheese." Brandon felt a shiver down his spine. Those details were exact, but he had never discussed his mother's recipe with any staff. How did Michael know this? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. "How do you know that?" asked Brandon, rising from his chair. Michael realized he had said too much. His hands trembled more visibly now, and he avoided the young man's gaze. I worked here when she was alive, sir. Sometimes she would come to the kitchen and—" "Liar," Brandon interrupted. "My mother never set foot in the kitchen. She was allergic to some spices." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael Reynolds knew he had made a grave mistake, and Brandon sensed he had uncovered something important, though he didn't yet know what. That afternoon, Brandon decided to investigate further. He sought out Mrs. Margaret, who was organizing bed linens on the mansion's upper floor. "Margaret, how long has Michael worked here?" he asked, trying to sound casual. The woman hesitated before answering, her hands pausing as she folded the sheets. "A very long time, Brandon. He arrived shortly before you were born." "Before I was born?" Brandon was surprised. "That means he's been here over 20 years? "Yes, perhaps even longer. Your mother, God rest her soul, was the one who insisted your father hire him. She said he needed an opportunity." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place in Brandon's mind. Why would his mother take such an interest in helping a complete stranger? And why did Michael seem to know intimate details about the family? Determined to uncover the truth, Brandon waited until late at night and went to the staff quarters in the mansion's basement. He knew he was invading the cook's privacy, but his curiosity outweighed any ethical concerns. Michael's room was simple but meticulously organized: a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a small desk. Brandon began searching the drawers, looking for clues about the man's past. It was in the last drawer that he found something that left him even more confused. There were old letters, yellowed with time, all written in his mother's unmistakable handwriting. Brandon would recognize that elegant script anywhere. With trembling hands, he opened one dated 15 years ago. "My dear brother, I hope this letter finds you well. Brandon has grown so much, and sometimes I see so much of you in him that my heart aches. Richard still refuses to speak of what happened, but I know you did nothing wrong. Please remain patient. One day the truth will come out and our family will be whole again. With all my love, Elizabeth." Brandon let the letter slip from his hands. Brother? Michael Reynolds was his mother's brother. But that was impossible. His mother had always said she was an only child, that she had no family besides her husband and son. Dazed, Brandon picked up another letter, this one more recent. Just 6 years old. "Michael, the doctor says I don't have much time. I need you to promise me you'll look after Brandon when I'm gone. He'll need a father figure, and Richard has been so distant lately. You were always the stronger one between us, the braver one. I know you can guide him down the right path. Your sister who loves you, Elizabeth." Brandon's legs gave way, and he had to sit down on Michael's bed. Everything was starting to make sense. The familiarity in the cook's voice, the knowledge of intimate family details, the affectionate way his mother always spoke about giving opportunities to those who deserve them. But if Michael was his mother's brother, why had no one ever told him? Why had Michael himself endured the humiliations without ever revealing the truth? Brandon put the letters back in the drawer and left the room quietly, his mind buzzing with questions. He spent the entire night awake, replaying every interaction he'd ever had with Michael over the years. The next day, Brandon was different. He watched Michael working in the kitchen with new eyes, noticing physical similarities he hadn't seen before: the shape of his nose, the way he moved his hands, even the faint smile when he thought no one was looking. At lunch, Brandon decided to test his suspicions. "Michael, do you have any family?" he asked suddenly. The cook nearly dropped the platter he was carrying. "No, Mr. Brandon, I have no one. Never married, never had siblings." Michael Reynolds grew visibly uneasy, his hands trembling again. "I'd rather not talk about my past if you don't mind." "But I do mind," Brandon insisted, standing up. "I want to know everything about you. How long have you known my family? Did you know my mother when she was young?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. Michael seemed to be fighting an internal battle, torn between keeping a secret and finally telling the truth. "Your mother was a special person," he said at last, his voice heavy with emotion. "She had a big heart, always cared about others." "That doesn't answer my question," Brandon pressed. Michael sighed deeply, as if carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Some stories are better left in the past, Mr. Brandon. Your mother thought so too." Frustrated, Brandon stomped out of the dining room. But he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. That afternoon, Brandon decided to visit Dr. William Patterson, the family lawyer for over 30 years. If anyone knew the Sullivans' secrets, it would be him. The lawyer's office was in downtown New York City, in an old, elegant building. Dr. Patterson, a gray-haired man with thick-rimmed glasses, greeted Brandon with his usual warmth. "Brandon, what a surprise. Your father didn't mention you were coming." "Actually, he doesn't know I'm here," Brandon admitted. "I need to ask you something about our family, and I hope you'll be honest with me." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Of course, ask away." "Did my mother have a brother?" Dr. Patterson visibly paled. His hands fidgeted with the papers on his desk, avoiding Brandon's gaze. "Why do you ask?" "So she did." Brandon stood up. "Why was I never told?" "Brandon, some things from the past are too complicated to explain." "He works in our house, doesn't he?" Brandon interrupted. "Michael Reynolds is my uncle." The silence that followed confirmed all of Brandon's suspicions. Dr. Patterson removed his glasses and rubbed his temples, seeming to age 10 years in seconds. "How did you find out?" "That doesn't matter now. What matters is why he's working as a servant in our house instead of being treated like family." Dr. Patterson sighed deeply before answering. "Brandon, this story involves very difficult decisions made years ago. Your father..." "What does my father have to do with it?" "He thought it was best you didn't know. At least not yet." Brandon felt the anger rise in his chest again, but this time directed at his father instead of Michael. "Where is my father now?" "He's away on business, won't be back until next week." "Then I'll have to find out the truth another way." Brandon left the office more determined than ever. If no one wanted to tell him the truth, he'd investigate every detail of the family's past himself. Back at the mansion, Brandon sought out Mrs. Margaret again. This time he was resolved not to accept half answers. "Margaret, I need you to be honest with me. Michael Reynolds is my uncle, isn't he?" The housekeeper stopped dusting the furniture and looked at him with sad eyes. "Brandon, why are you stirring up these things? Some wounds are better left to heal in peace." "Because I'm tired of the lies," the young man exploded. "I'm tired of being deceived by my own family." Margaret sighed and sat in one of the armchairs in the living room. "Sit down, boy. If you really want to know, I'll tell you, but promise me you won't do anything rash." Brandon sat on the sofa, his heart pounding. "A long time ago, your mother and Michael were very close. They grew up together, always protecting each other. When your mother met your father, Michael was just starting to work at the family company." "What happened?" "There was an accident at the company over 20 years ago, an explosion in the main warehouse. Someone had mixed chemicals incorrectly, and the result was devastating." Brandon tensed. He'd never heard of any accident at the company. "Several people were hurt," Margaret continued, "and someone had to take the blame. Your father was the technical supervisor at the time, but Michael took the fall to protect the family's future." The housekeeper's words struck Brandon like lightning. His uncle had sacrificed himself to save his father, and by extension, the whole family. Michael was fired, lost everything, had to pay huge fines. He was practically left in poverty. Your mother was desperate, begged your father to help her brother, but he said it would look too suspicious. "So how did Michael end up here?" "Your mother insisted. She said if your father didn't give Michael a chance to work here, she'd tell everyone the truth. It was the only time I ever saw Elizabeth make a threat in her life." Brandon felt his world collapse. All these years he'd humiliated and mistreated the man who'd saved his family, the man who'd lost everything to protect his future. "Why did Michael never tell me?" "Because he promised your mother he'd keep the secret. She believed if you knew the truth, it would cause problems between you and your father. Michael agreed to live as a servant to keep the family together." Brandon rushed to his room, locked the door, and collapsed on the bed. The tears he'd held back for so long finally fell. He remembered every cruel word he'd said to Michael, every humiliation he'd inflicted on the man who was actually his hero. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now continuing. In the days that followed, Brandon could barely look at Michael without feeling a mix of shame and admiration. The cook went about his work as usual, always polite and helpful, showing no resentment for the humiliations he'd endured. It was a rainy Thursday when Brandon found Michael in the mansion's garden, tending to the roses his mother had loved so much. The older man knelt in the wet soil, carefully trimming the dead branches. "These were Elizabeth's favorite flowers," Michael said without looking up, as if he knew Brandon was watching. Do you visit her grave?" Brandon asked, his voice barely audible. Michael stopped trimming the roses and slowly stood up, wiping his dirt-stained hands on his pants. "Every week, I always bring these white roses she loved so much." "Why? Why do you keep tending to all this after how I've treated you?" Michael finally looked directly at Brandon, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Because I promised her I'd take care of you, Brandon, and a promise made to a sister is sacred." The word sister hung in the air like thunder. It was the first time Michael had openly acknowledged their relation. "You know that I know, don't you?" Brandon said, his voice trembling. Michael nodded slowly. "I always knew you'd figure it out someday. Elizabeth always said you were too clever to stay in the dark forever. Then why didn't you ever tell me the truth? Because sometimes the truth hurts more than the lie, and I didn't want you carrying the weight of guilt that I do." "What guilt? You did nothing wrong. It was my father who caused the accident." Michael shook his head sadly. "No, Brandon, your father was young, inexperienced. He made a mistake, but I was older. I should have supervised better. The blame was mine." Brandon couldn't believe what he was hearing. Even after all these years, even after losing everything, Michael still protected his father. "How can you be so good?" Brandon asked, his voice breaking. "Because your mother taught me that love for family is worth more than any pride or money. And watching you grow, flaws and all, has always been my greatest reward." In that moment, Brandon felt his heart break and mend all at once. For the first time in his life, he understood the true meaning of sacrifice and unconditional love. But before he could respond, they heard the sound of a car pulling into the garage. Richard Sullivan had returned from his business trip earlier than expected. Brandon rushed into the house, finding his father in the entryway with his travel bags. Richard, a man in his 50s with graying temples, looked tired and troubled. "Dad, we need to talk," Brandon said without preamble. "Brandon, good to see you. I need to speak with you about some things too, but first I know about Michael," the young man interrupted. "I know he's Mom's brother. I know about the accident at the company. I know everything." Richard froze, his bags dropping to the marble floor with a thud. How did you find out?" "That doesn't matter now. What matters is why you let me treat my own uncle like a common employee all these years." Richard dragged his hands over his face, suddenly looking older. "Brandon, things aren't as simple as they seem." "Then explain it to me. Explain how you let the man who saved our family be humiliated in his own home every day." Richard walked into the living room, gesturing for Brandon to follow. He sank heavily into his favorite armchair, the same one where he used to read the Sunday paper. "You want the truth, the whole truth?" Richard asked, his voice heavy with pain. "Yes, all of it." Richard took a deep breath before continuing. "Michael didn't take the blame for the accident to protect me, Brandon. He did it because I begged him to." Brandon felt as if the ground had opened beneath him. "What? I was young, ambitious. I wanted to impress my father and the company partners. I mixed the chemicals without following safety protocol, just to speed things up. When everything exploded, I panicked." Richard's words stabbed at Brandon's heart. "Michael was in the warehouse with me that day, but not as an employee. He had come to visit me. When he saw what had happened, when he saw how desperate I was, he offered to take the blame." "Why? Why would he do that?" "Because he knew that if the truth came out, our family would lose everything. The company, the house, all of it. And Elizabeth was pregnant with you at the time." Brandon felt nauseous. Michael's generosity was even greater than he had imagined. "I tried to stop him," Richard continued, tears streaming down his face. "I said I'd face the consequences of my actions. But Michael insisted. He said one day I'd have a chance to make it up to him." "And you never did," Brandon shouted, rising from his chair. "You let him work as a servant for over 20 years. Do you think I don't know that?" Richard also stood, his voice choked. "Do you think I don't hate myself every day for it?" Father and son stared at each other in silence, both breathing heavily. Michael refused to take money, Richard finally said. He wouldn't let me pay his debts, wouldn't let me help him publicly. The only thing he asked for was a humble job in our home, so he could stay close to his sister. Then why did you let me treat him so badly? Because I'm a coward, Richard exploded. Because every time I see Michael, I remember what I did, what he sacrificed for me. And instead of facing my guilt, I pretended he was just an ordinary servant. Brandon had never seen his father cry before. The man who always seemed strong and composed was falling apart before his eyes. Elizabeth tried to make me understand, Richard went on. She begged me to treat Michael like family, but I always made excuses. Said it would seem strange, that people would suspect, that it was better to keep up appearances. And now? Brandon asked, his anger slowly turning to sorrow. Now it's too late. Michael has suffered so much he probably can't even imagine being treated differently. Just then, they heard footsteps at the door. Michael Reynolds stood in the doorway, clearly having overheard part of the conversation. "Excuse me, sirs," he said softly. "I didn't mean to interrupt, but Mrs. Margaret asked me to let you know dinner is ready." Richard and Brandon looked at Michael, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. There stood the man who had saved their lives, serving them humbly even after hearing all that had been said. "Michael," Richard began, but his voice failed. "You don't have to say anything, Richard," Michael said gently. "I heard everything, but it changes nothing. I made my choice long ago and I don't regret it." "But I regret it," Brandon cried, rushing toward his uncle. "I regret every cruel word I said to you, every humiliation I caused." Michael Reynolds opened his arms and hugged his nephew for the first time in 23 years. The embrace was long, filled with years of pain, misunderstandings, and buried love. "You're just like Elizabeth when she was little," Michael said, stroking Brandon's hair. "Always so emotional, always wanting to fix the whole world at once. How can you forgive me after everything?" "Because you're my family, Brandon, and family always forgives, no matter what." Richard approached the two hesitantly. "Michael, You don't have to apologize, Richard," Michael interrupted, extending his hand to his brother-in-law. "We both made hard choices long ago. What matters is what we do from now on." Richard took Michael's hand and gripped it tightly, like a drowning man clinging to a lifeline. "How can you be so generous after all you've been through? Because Elizabeth taught me that resentment is a poison we feed ourselves, and I promised her I'd take care of this family, not hold grudges." The three men stood there in the middle of the living room, united for the first time in decades. The weight of secrets had finally been lifted from their shoulders, and now they needed to learn to live with the truth. "What do we do now?" asked Brandon. "Now you're going to have dinner," said Michael with a small smile. "I made Elizabeth special gnocchi with nutmeg and freshly grated parmesan." Richard and Brandon laughed through their tears. Even after everything, Michael was still caring for them the only way he knew how. "No," said Richard, standing beside his brother-in-law. "Now we'll have dinner, as a family." That night, for the first time in over 20 years, Michael Reynolds sat at the main table of the Sullivan mansion, not as an employee but as what he should always have been, a member of the family. The conversation flowed naturally, with Michael sharing stories about Elizabeth that Brandon had never heard, and Richard finally able to look his brother-in-law in the eye without shame. "Michael, you need to stop working as a cook," Brandon said suddenly. "I'll talk to the legal department to—" "No," Michael interrupted gently. "I enjoy cooking. I always have. It's how I care for the people I love." "But you can't keep being treated like an employee." "Then don't treat me like one," Michael said with a smile. "Treat me like an uncle who loves cooking for his family." Richard laughed, a sound that hadn't left his throat in years. "Elizabeth always said you had an answer for everything." "And she was right," Michael agreed, "including what we should do about the company." "What do you mean?" asked Richard, turning serious. "I mean it's time you stop carrying this guilt alone. It's time we tell everyone the truth." Richard paled. "Michael, if we do that, the company could—" "The company will survive," Michael said firmly, "and so will we. But we can't keep living a lie." Brandon looked at his father and uncle, understanding the magnitude of what was being proposed. "He's right, Dad. We can't build the future on lies from the past." Richard thought for a few minutes, watching the two most important men in his life. "If we do this, we'll face lawsuits, investigations, maybe even criminal charges." "Then we'll face them together," Michael said, reaching his hand across the table, "like a family should." Brandon placed his hand over his uncle's, and Richard, after hesitating a moment, did the same. "Together," Richard agreed. In the weeks that followed, life in the Sullivan mansion changed completely. Michael kept cooking, but now he was treated as he always should have been, a respected member of the family. Brandon, in turn, underwent a radical transformation. Discovering the truth about his uncle made him rethink his entire worldview and how he treated those around him. "Mrs. Margaret," he said one morning, finding the housekeeper organizing the library, "I wanted to apologize for how I've always treated you." The woman stopped dusting the books and looked at him in surprise. "Brandon, I know I've been arrogant and disrespectful to all the staff. I want you to know that's going to change." Margaret smiled, her eyes filling with tears. "Your mother would be so proud of you, young man." Brandon began treating all the staff with respect and consideration. He learned everyone's names, asked about their families, and took a genuine interest in their lives. "Harold," he said to the gardener who had tended the lawn for 15 years, "how's your daughter doing with her college applications?" The 60-year-old man nearly dropped the lawnmower in surprise. She got into university, Mr. Brandon. She's going to study medicine." "That's wonderful. If you need any help with anything, just let me know." These small changes didn't go unnoticed by Michael, who watched his nephew's transformation with pride and emotion. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 1 month after the revelation, Richard finally mustered the courage to do what he knew needed to be done. He called an extraordinary meeting of the company's board, including all the principal partners. The meeting room was tense when Richard entered, accompanied by Brandon and Michael. Many of those present recognized Michael as the former employee who had taken the blame for the accident years ago, but were confused to see him seated at the head table. "Gentlemen," Richard began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I've called this meeting to share a truth that should have been revealed long ago." The silence in the room was deafening. The accident that happened at our company over 20 years ago wasn't caused by Michael Reynolds, as everyone believes. It was caused by me. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room. Some partners exchanged glances, unsure how to react. "Richard, what are you saying?" asked Dr. Anderson, the senior partner. "I'm saying that Michael Reynolds took the blame for a mistake that was mine to protect our family. And for all these years, I allowed that lie to continue." Michael stood from his chair, his presence commanding despite the years of humiliation. "Gentlemen, I made my choice knowingly. Richard had a family to support, a future to build. I had nothing to lose." "But you had everything to lose," Brandon interrupted, also standing. "You lost your dignity, your future, your social standing, all to protect a mistake that wasn't even yours." Dr. Anderson shook his head, trying to process the information. "Richard, do you understand the implications of what you're telling us, the legal consequences?" "I understand perfectly, and I'm prepared to face them. But I can't live with this lie any longer." "And the company?" another partner asked. "If this goes public, our reputation should be built on truth, not lies," Richard said firmly. "If the company can't survive the truth, then maybe it doesn't deserve to survive." Michael looked at Richard with admiration. Finally, after so many years, his brother-in-law was finding the courage he'd always known he had. "I propose that Michael Reynolds be reinstated as a partner in the company," Richard said, "with all the rights and compensations he should have received these past years." The discussion that followed was intense. Some partners were willing to accept the truth and its consequences, while others worried about the legal and financial implications of the revelation. But in the end, the majority agreed it was time to do what was right, regardless of the fallout. Michael, who had remained silent for most of the discussion, finally spoke up. "Gentlemen, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to be a partner out of pity or to make up for past mistakes. If I return to the business, it'll be because I can contribute to the company's future. And you can," Dr. Anderson said. "Your ideas about people management were always revolutionary. Maybe it's time to implement them." In the months that followed, the revelation of the truth caused an earthquake in the company and the industry press. There were investigations, lawsuits, and endless speculation about the future of the Sullivan family's business. But there was also something unexpected: respect. Many people, including clients and competitors, admired Richard's courage in telling the truth after so many years, and Michael's generosity in sacrificing himself for the family. "Dad, have you seen the news reports?" asked Brandon, entering Richard's office with a newspaper in his hands. "They're calling Uncle Michael the man who sacrificed everything for his family." Richard smiled, watching Michael through the window. His brother-in-law was in the garden, teaching some new employees how to care for the plants. "Your mother would be proud," said Richard. "She always knew Michael was special." "And you, Dad? How do you feel now that everything's out in the open?" Richard thought for a moment before answering. "I feel free, Brandon. For the first time in over 20 years, I feel truly free. The company went through a period of turbulence, but it gradually stabilized. The new management, with Michael actively involved in decisions, brought a more human approach to business. Michael, your idea of offering scholarships for employees' children was brilliant," said Brandon during a meeting. "Applications tripled this month." "It wasn't my idea," Michael replied modestly. "It was your mother who always said education was the best investment we could make. Still, you're the one who made it happen, and the results speak for themselves. Indeed, the company was thriving in a way Richard had never imagined. The policy of valuing employees had created a more productive and harmonious work environment. "You know what Elizabeth would say if she were here?" Michael asked one evening as the three of them dined together. "What?" Richard and Brandon asked in unison. "She'd say, 'Didn't I tell you? When family stands together, everything gets easier.'" Richard laughed, remembering his wife's simple wisdom. "She was always right, wasn't she?" "Always," Michael agreed. "And she'd be especially proud of you, Brandon." "Of me? Why?" "Because you learned the most important lesson she could teach, that true power doesn't come from putting others down, but from lifting them up." Brandon felt warmth in his chest. The transformation he'd gone through wasn't just about uncovering the truth about his uncle. It was about discovering who he truly wanted to be. 2 years after the revelation, the Sullivan mansion had become a completely different place. The once tense and formal atmosphere was now full of life and joy. "Uncle Michael, can you teach me how to make that chocolate cake Mom loved?" Brandon asked, walking into the kitchen where Michael was preparing lunch. "Of course. Elizabeth always said the recipe was a family secret. Now that you know we're truly family, I can teach you." As Michael showed Brandon how to make the cake, Mrs. Margaret watched from the doorway with a smile. "Mrs. Elizabeth would be so happy to see you two like this," she said. "She is watching," Michael replied, glancing at a photo of Elizabeth on the kitchen wall. "I'm sure of it." Brandon, now 25, had matured greatly since learning the truth about his uncle, not just in terms of business responsibility, but as a person. "Uncle, can I ask you something?" he said while stirring the cake batter. "Of course. Have you ever regretted taking the blame for Dad?" Michael stopped whisking the eggs and thought carefully before answering. "Never, Brandon, not for a second. Even after everything you went through, the humiliation, the loss of status, the years working as an employee. Even then, because it all led me here, to this moment. It let me watch you grow, let me care for the family Elizabeth loved so much, and in the end it brought me back to where I always belonged." Brandon felt tears in his eyes. His uncle's wisdom and generosity still amazed him every day. "You're the wisest man I know," he said. "I'm not wise, Brandon. I just learned that love is stronger than pride, and that family is the only thing that truly matters in this life." That afternoon, Richard came home early from the office and found his father and uncle in the kitchen, covered in flour and laughing like children. "What's going on here?" he asked with a smile. "We're learning the family secrets," replied Brandon, pointing to the cake still in the oven. "Family secrets," Richard repeated, savoring the words. "I like that. We've had too many secrets around here. It's time we had good ones." Michael hugged both men, feeling deep gratitude for everything they'd been through together. Elizabeth always said the best family secrets are the recipes, the love stories, and the moments of shared joy, he said. "Then let's make plenty of good secrets from now on," Brandon replied, and that's exactly what they did. In the years that followed, the Sullivan family became an example of unity, respect, and unconditional love. The business thrived, not just financially, but as a place where people felt valued and respected. Brandon, once known for his arrogance and cruelty, was now admired for his humility and generosity. Richard had finally learned to live free from guilt, and Michael had found his rightful place in the family he'd always loved. Their story became legendary in New York City's business community, not for financial success, but as an example of how love and forgiveness can transform entire lives. And every Thursday, without fail, Michael visited Elizabeth's grave, bringing white roses and sharing the family's latest news. Because even though she was no longer physically present, she remained the heart that kept them all together. "Thank you, Elizabeth," he always said before leaving. "Thank you for teaching me that true love can transform any heart." And in the quiet of the cemetery, Michael was sure he could hear his sister's joyful laughter, approving of all the changes love had brought to their lives. Fayant now. Tell us what you thought of this story of transformation and forgiveness. Do you believe Brandon made the right decisions upon discovering the truth about his uncle? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like if this story touched your heart. Subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one.